immediately staking a claim in the center, controlling key squares and opening lines for development. Establishing a flexible central presence, this knight immediately challenges white's central pawn structure, hinting at dynamic play. Establishing central presence, c4 immediately challenges black's knight's influence and prepares to build a pawn bastion. Solidifying the center and preparing for bishop development, this establishes a foundational structure. Developing the knight to c3 bolsters the central pawn chain and prepares for further queenside expansion, while also defending the d4 pawn. Challenging the center directly, this pawn advance seeks to open lines and create immediate counterplay against white's solid structure. Solidifying central control and preparing for queen-pawn recaptures, this knight now eyes the kingside while maintaining a flexible pawn structure. Developing the knight to d7 prepares for a potential c5 pawn push, aiming to contest white's central pawn structure. Developing the bishop to f4 proactively contests the d6 square and aims to restrict black's queenside piece activity. Reinforcing the central pawn chain with c6 solidifies black's structure, setting the stage for a solid queen's gambit declined formation. Solidifying the center's pawn structure, this maneuver prepares for rapid piece development while limiting black's immediate counterplay on the e-file. Solidifying the pawn chain, this natural development prepares castling while maintaining flexibility. Developing the bishop to d3 neatly prepares kingside castling and bolsters central pawn control, aiming for a solid, harmonious piece setup. Finally, securing the monarch offers a breathing spell, preparing for central pawn advances or piece development. Securing the monarch offers a crucial defensive pillar while preparing for central pawn advances and potential knight repositioning. Challenging the bishop's influence and seeking active piece play, this knight's sortie hints at a potential kingside attack, though it temporarily vacates central squares. Opening up the bishop's diagonal to pressure the queenside is a key strategic idea here. Introducing a pawn to the kingside, black boldly challenges white's bishop and aims to expand their own space. Uniting queenside forces, the monarch's shield is temporarily weakened. Securing the queenside pawn structure prevents white's queenside expansion and prepares b5. Eliminating the central pawn tension now opens the c-file for potential pressure. Breaking the central tension opens the c-file, offering a new avenue for your pieces. Knight's journey to the edge aims to disrupt black's queenside structure and secure control of the dark squares. Re-establishing the knight's central presence, the knight embarks on a journey to better contest the d4 pawn's influence. Sacrificing a tempo, the bishop aims to provoke weaknesses and disrupt black's pawn structure, potentially opening lines for attack. Repositioning the queen seeks shelter and prepares for potential pawn pushes, but leaves the queenside somewhat exposed to the advancing knight. Establishing control of the open c-file now becomes a primary objective, pressuring black's isolated queenside pawn. Injecting dynamism, the knight ventures into enemy territory, disrupting white's queenside structure. Asserting control over the central squares, this knight prepares to enter active play and potentially disrupt black's queenside plans. Exchanging knights clears the central files for potential future clashes and opens lines for piece activity. Liberating the queen's pawn opens lines and creates potential tactical shots against black's somewhat exposed king. Bolstering the queenside, this bishop prepares to contest the open c-file and shield its monarch from potential intrusions. Aggressively contesting the d-file, the knight now eyes the vulnerable d5 pawn and aims to disrupt black's queenside structure. Preparing to challenge white's imposing bishop while opening a route for the rook's counterplay. Sacrificing the bishop for positional pressure, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially exploit the open lines. Relinquishing control of the file now allows white's rook to become highly active on that crucial open column. Retreating the bishop here is a curious positional sacrifice, aiming to provoke pawn weaknesses and open lines. Sacrificing clarity for an attempt to unjam the queenside, This retreat reiterates a defensive posture that surrenders initiative. Attempting to provoke tactical complications by dancing the bishop, but it risks a tempo loss. The rook's retreat to the 8th rank seems to be a repositioning for a potential counterplay on the queen side or a defense against white's advanced pieces. Finally seizing the initiative, white breaks the positional deadlock with a decisive material gain, opening lines for a swift attack. Finally reclaiming the knight, black secures the central queen and initiates a likely endgame. Unlocking the queen's attack creates immediate tactical threats, forcing black's pieces to react defensively. Recentralizing the queen after the pawn's sacrifice offers potential counterplay, but the white rook's pressure along the c-file remains a pressing concern. Exchanges are clearing the way for a direct attack on black's exposed king. This pawn thrust liberates the bishop, aiming to disrupt white's queenside structure and potentially open lines for counterplay. Seizing the b-pawn shatters black's queenside pawn structure, initiating a decisive endgame advantage. Seeking activity and pinning down white's queen on c7, but sacrifices a pawn's tempo for this initiative. A bold maneuver aiming to disrupt black's central pawn structure and potentially open lines for attack. Initiating a strategic repositioning, the queen seeks safer pastures, preparing to potentially support a central pawn push or offer defense against white's active pieces. Securing the central files now targets black's exposed king, aiming to exploit the newly opened avenues. Initiating a fight for central control, this bishop now aims to disrupt white's coordinated pieces. Securing the queen side and preparing to exploit the open c-file is a prudent regrouping. A bold sacrifice to disrupt white's coordination and pry open lines toward the exposed king. Protecting the king from further checks becomes paramount after that daring queen sacrifice. Offering piece exchange to open lines and activate the bishop, seeking counterplay. Sacrificing the knight opens fascinating tactical avenues, exposing black's king to immediate threats. The rook sacrifices itself to disrupt white's imposing knight formation and create counterplay. A tactical retreat that aims to recapture material by exploiting black's centralized king. Reawakening the dormant queen, this maneuver injects immediate tactical spice, threatening counterplay and forcing a strategic reevaluation. Seizing the initiative to simplify, aiming to exploit the open files and control central squares. Opening the e-file now grants decisive attacking prospects, directly threatening the king's safety. Reclaiming tempo, white forces black's bishop onto a passive diagonal, hoping to exploit the cramped king. Exposing the king becomes a dangerous gamble now, as black's rook finds an active post. Unleashing the rook to command the central file suddenly offers attacking prospects against black's exposed monarch. A defensive maneuver, seeking to create a pawn shield for the king, although it neglects an active piece coordination. Opening the f-file with the rook initiates aggressive intentions against black's exposed king. Shifting the queen to defend against the knights, advance cleverly aims to avoid immediate material loss. Repositioning the rook to the open file is a sensible attempt to establish greater pressure on the queen side. Liberating the bishop unlocks attacking potential, but sacrifices pawn structure and potentially piece coordination. Material gain secured, the king's exposed flank becomes white's immediate target. Sacrificing material here to disrupt white's central pawn structure is a desperate attempt, but it leaves black's king exposed to a swift attack. The rook's repositioning secures the queen side, though it forfeits a pawn and invites potential counterplay along the open file. Grabbing the pawn is a tempting impulse, but it overlooks how white's knights will now dominate the center and create threats. Repositioning the rook to the open flank opens up the path for the other rook to become active. Repositioning the bishop to d4 seeks to activate it and potentially threaten the white queen, aiming for a more dynamic endgame presence. Consolidating material advantage by preparing to improve your king's safety feels prudent here. Asserting pressure on the queen side, This repositions the bishop to eye vulnerable pawns and hinder white's attacking prospects. Initiating a bold pawn sacrifice to seize the open file and pressure black's weakened structure. Repositioning the rook here offers potential counterplay against white's centralized queen and pawn structure. Reclaiming the bishop's influence and preparing to contest the open files offers a new angle for development. Reclaiming the bishop from the pinned pawn's influence offers some counterplay, but the exposed king remains a concern.